Last week, the CBC uncovered what was called the Native Extremism Program. CBC Indigenous managed to get their hands on RCMP Security Service files that revealed that post the Cold War, Canada's Domestic Intelligence Agency kept close tabs on hundreds of individuals and 30 Indigenous political organizations throughout the 60s and 70s. The RCMP managed to use things like wiretaps, paid informants, and literal spies to keep tabs on the Indigenous rights movement. There are three aspects of this story that I want to highlight. The first thing that I think is so important for us to take note of is the fact that Indigenous folks have been telling us that this surveillance existed long before these documents came out.
I knew they were doing it. It wasn't very covert. It was very overt. They would park right in front of the Indian Brotherhood office, the designation office, and they were taking pictures of.
Numerous Indigenous folks who were involved in organizing at that time have confirmed that they were well aware that this was going on. There just wasn't this kind of documentation to prove it. I think the fact that this is only being taken seriously now that we have 6,000 pages of intelligence documents to prove it speaks to the way that we do not believe victims, and particularly Indigenous victims. Next aspect of this that I want to highlight is just how long it took to get these documents. It was a 4-year fight, and the government tried to delay the release of these archives by 42 months because they claimed that releasing them would be a threat to national Canadian security. This is clearly just another example of the settler colonial project at play. It's no coincidence that it's so difficult for Canadian journalists to get access to documents and records, and that's because the government knows that putting out these kinds of records that make so clear their violent colonialism is a threat to the settler colonial state. Moreover, the fact that an organization like the CBC had to step in to get access to these documents and that they wouldn't have just been provided to Indigenous folks who are literally named in these documents. And the last thing that I want to emphasize the most here is that this surveillance of Indigenous folks has not ended. There have been numerous cases of this, far more than I can talk about in this one video. But for example, we know that in 2019, the CSI was involved in surveilling Indigenous groups who were opposed to the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline project. We also know that numerous individual Indigenous leaders have been specifically targeted with surveillance. For example, we know that Dr. Blackstock was extensively monitored between 2009 and 2011. And there's also been extensive research and writing about the fact that the CSIS has been colluding with various enforcement agencies and resource extraction projects as a way of deepening their surveillance. I think that as we talk about this story and also as we push for not only an apology, but real restorative justice for those who were impacted by this program, I think it's so important to still keep in mind the way that these surveillance processes continue to push not only for restorative justice, but also current privacy justice.